The pop of the cork was a punctuation mark, a sharp, celebratory sound in a room thick with the silent ink of signatures. Chloe Constantine, soon to be formerly Chloe Maxwell, held the bottle of vintage champagne aloft, a triumphant smile gracing her perfectly sculpted lips. She looked at Liam, her husband of 5 years, with an expression that was not quite pity, but a detached sort of sympathy one might reserve for a fallen, uninteresting competitor. He sat perfectly still in the plush armchair across from her, his hands resting on his knees, his expression unreadable. The divorce papers, crisp and severe, lay on the mahogany table between them, a treaty ending a war only one of them had seemed to be fighting. Chloe thought this was her victory. She thought she was shedding 5 years of dead weight, of being tethered to a man whose ambition had fizzled out into a quiet, respectable, but ultimately mediocre career. Liam Maxwell, the architect of small, uninspired buildings. The man who dreamed in concrete and glass, but built only in modest brick and wood. Within minutes, she believed her life would begin again, lighter, richer, and free of his quiet, unassuming presence. What she didn't know was that Liam was the architect of more than just buildings. He was the architect of this very moment, and the foundation of the world she was so eagerly celebrating was about to be demolished. The phone call that would shatter her reality was less than 5 minutes away. It's a strange thing, isn't it? How we can live beside someone, share a bed, a home, a life, and still see only the surface they allow us to see. Have you ever felt underestimated, looked down upon by the very people who should have known you best? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because this is a story about the quiet strength that grows in the shadows of someone else's arrogance. And if you enjoy stories where patience and integrity finally get their due, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more. Now, let's get back to that glass of champagne. Chloe poured the bubbling liquid into a tall, delicate flute, the foam fizzing with an energy that matched her own. To new beginnings, she said, her voice smooth as silk. She did not offer Liam a glass. It was not a shared celebration. This was her declaration of independence. Liam watched her, his gaze steady. He didn't look angry or hurt. He looked calm. It was a calmness that had always infuriated her. It felt like a judgment, a silent refusal to participate in the high-stakes drama of her world, the world of her family, the Constantines. They were titans of industry, a dynasty built on ruthless acquisitions and public displays of extravagant success. Liam, with his quiet dignity and his small, 2-person firm, had been a baffling disappointment to them from the very beginning. He was a project Chloe had taken on, a handsome piece of clay she had intended to mold into a man worthy of the Constantine name. But the clay had refused to be molded. It had simply remained itself, solid and unyielding. "I do wish you the best, Liam," she said, taking a delicate sip. The words were a formality, a final, condescending pat on the head. "I know things have been difficult, but you'll be fine. You're resilient." She meant he was used to disappointment. He inclined his head slightly. "And you, Chloe, I wish you everything you deserve." The statement hung in the air, simple but carrying a devastating weight she couldn't yet feel. To her, it sounded like a concession, a final admission of his own inadequacy. She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile of relief. The settlement had been generous, in her view. He hadn't fought her on the house, the sprawling, glass-walled mansion her father had gifted them as a wedding present. He hadn't fought her on the cars, the art, the accounts she had assumed were primarily funded by her family's wealth. He had only asked for his personal effects and the contents of his small, dusty study. He had been, in her lawyer's words, remarkably compliant. She saw it as weakness, the quiet surrender of a man who knew he was outmatched. She had no idea it was the precision of a surgeon making the final, bloodless cut. The study. She'd always hated that room. It was the one part of the house that felt like him. It was filled with books on structural engineering and urban planning, sketches of buildings that looked more like sculptures, and a single, large drafting table where he would spend countless hours working on what he called his passion project. She'd mocked him for it. Another library for a town no one's ever heard of, Liam? Or perhaps a community center that will win you a pat on the back from a local newspaper. He would just smile that quiet smile and continue to draw. He had been drawing a lot lately. In the final, icy months of their marriage, as they moved through their magnificent house like polite, well-dressed ghosts, the light in his study had often been the only one on late into the night. She'd assumed it was his retreat, his escape into a fantasy world where his small-scale ambitions were grand achievements. She had pitied him for it. The source of her pity, her condescension, her profound misunderstanding of the man she was leaving, stemmed from a fundamental difference in their perception of value. For Chloe and the Constantines, value was loud. It was the roar of a sports car, the clinking of champagne glasses at a gala, the headline in a financial newspaper announcing another corporate conquest. Liam's value was silent. It was in the integrity of a well-placed beam, the quiet harmony of a space designed for people to live in, not just to be seen in. And, as she was about to discover, it was in the silent, methodical acquisition of power, a power so vast and so deeply hidden that its eventual revelation would not make a sound. It would simply be a fact, as undeniable and as solid as the foundations he was so skilled at building. Her phone, a sleek sliver of metal and glass, buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. An unknown number. She ignored it, lifting her glass again to admire the way the light fractured through the crystal. But the phone buzzed again, insistent. And again. "You might want to answer that," Liam said, his voice even. "I believe it's for you." There was something in his tone, a note of finality, of knowledge, that pricked through her celebratory haze. She frowned, picking up the device. She answered, her voice clipped and impatient. "Hello." A man's voice, professional and devoid of warmth, spoke on the other end. "Am I speaking with Miss Chloe Constantine?" "Yes." "Who is this?" "This is Mr. Alistair Finch from the Private Banking Division of Sterling Global Bank. I'm calling regarding several accounts and credit facilities held jointly under your name and the name of Liam Maxwell, as well as several corporate guarantees you have co-signed for Constantine Holdings." Chloe's smile faltered. The bank? Why would the bank be calling her now? Everything had been settled. Her father, Marcus Constantine, handled all the important financial matters. "I think there's been a mistake," she said coolly. "My divorce was just finalized. My personal accounts are being separated from Mr. Maxwell's." "Yes, we are aware of that," the voice replied, with a chilling lack of concern. "That is, in fact, why I'm calling. Mr. Maxwell, as the primary account holder and the sole guarantor of the liquidity that underpins these facilities, has just instructed us to call all outstanding debts and to freeze any assets held as collateral against them. As you are a primary co-signatory and corporate guarantor, the freeze applies to you and to Constantine Holdings. The call is a professional courtesy before the official notices are dispatched." The champagne flute suddenly felt very heavy in Chloe's hand. The words were just words, financial jargon she barely understood, but the tone was unmistakable. It was the tone of an executioner. I don't understand," she stammered, looking across at Liam. His face was unchanged. He was simply watching her, his calm expression now looking less like serenity and more like the dead, quiet center of a hurricane. "What collateral? What debts?" "According to our records," Mr. Finch continued, his voice a relentless, dispassionate drone, "the collateral listed includes the property at 114 Willow Creek Lane, 3 vehicles registered under your name, your entire securities portfolio, and, most significantly, a controlling interest in Constantine Holdings, which was pledged as collateral against a series of emergency bridge loans taken out over the last 18 months." The man paused, a beat of calculated silence. "Mr. Maxwell's personal holding company has now acquired that debt. In effect, Ms. Constantine, he has just taken control of your family's company. And as for the house you are currently in, a foreclosure notice will be delivered within the hour." The glass slipped from her fingers. It did not shatter. It landed on the thick, plush Persian rug with a dull, muffled thud, the pale gold liquid seeping into the expensive fibers like a spreading stain. The celebration was over. To understand the depth of Chloe's shock, one must first understand the world she came from. The Constantines did not simply possess wealth. They inhabited it. It was the air they breathed, the language they spoke, the very architecture of their reality. Her father, Marcus Constantine, was a man who saw the world as a series of assets to be acquired. He was a corporate raider from an older, more brutal school of business, a man who had built Constantine Holdings by absorbing weaker companies, stripping them down, and selling off the parts. He was perpetually unimpressed, a man whose love and approval were measured in stock prices and profit margins. When Chloe brought Liam home for the first time, Marcus had looked at him not as a potential son-in-law, but as a balance sheet. He saw a young, promising architect from a good, but not powerful, family. He saw potential, but it was potential he intended to direct and control. Architecture is a noble profession, Marcus had said during that first dinner, swirling a glass of deep red wine that cost more than Liam's monthly rent at the time. But it's a service industry, my boy. You build things for other men. The real power lies in owning the things they build. Liam had simply nodded, a small, polite smile on his face. There's a certain power in creation as well, sir, he had replied, his voice calm and respectful. Marcus had laughed, a short, sharp bark. Creation is for artists. We are in the business of acquisition. That dinner set the tone for the next 5 years. Liam was consistently, quietly, and politely treated as a decorative but ultimately useless addition to the Constantine dynasty. Chloe's mother, Eleanor, a woman who had long ago sublimated her own identity into that of Mrs. Constantine, was kind to him in a distant, brittle way. She would compliment his manners and his choice of tie, but her eyes would betray a constant, simmering disappointment. He was not what she had envisioned for her only daughter. He did not move with the casual, predatory confidence of the men in their circle. He didn't play golf at the right clubs or summer in the right places. He worked. Chloe, caught between her genuine affection for the kind, steady man she had married and the relentless pressure of her family's expectations, began to adopt their perspective. In the early days, she had defended him. He's brilliant, Daddy. You should see his designs. They're elegant, but her defense grew weaker over time, eroded by the constant drip of her father's condescension and her own growing impatience. She wanted the life she had been promised, a life of effortless glamour and influence, and Liam seemed content to build a life of quiet purpose. The first major crack appeared 2 years into their marriage. Marcus had offered Liam a position at Constantine Holdings, heading up their real estate development division. It was a token offer, a way to bring him into the fold and put him on a leash. The salary was obscene, the perks extravagant. It would have meant overseeing the construction of soulless corporate towers and sprawling, identical luxury condominium complexes, the very kind of architecture Liam disdained. He turned it down. He did it politely, of course. He met with Marcus in his vast, top-floor office overlooking the city, a space designed to intimidate. Liam had thanked him profusely for the opportunity, but explained that he was committed to his own firm, to his vision of creating human-centric spaces. Marcus had been stunned into a rare silence. No one said no to him. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold. Your firm? Maxwell Architects? What is it? You and that one other fellow in a rented office above a coffee shop. You're turning down a 7-figure salary to build patios for suburban dentists. We're small, but we're growing, Liam had said, his composure unwavering. And the work is meaningful to me. From that day on, in the eyes of Marcus Constantine, Liam was not just a disappointment. He was a fool, a man who didn't understand the fundamental rules of power and money. Chloe was mortified. She saw his refusal not as an act of integrity, but as an act of defiance against her family, against her. The argument they had that night was a bitter one. How could you embarrass me like that? She had demanded, pacing their cavernous living room. He was handing you the world on a silver platter, and you said no? For what? Your precious vision? It wouldn't have been my vision, Chloe, he tried to explain, his voice patient. It would have been mine. My name would have been on the letterhead. but the soul of the work would have belonged to your father. I can't do that. The soul of the work? She'd scoffed, her voice dripping with scorn. What soul is there in the blueprints for a dental clinic in a strip mall? That's all you do, Liam. You do tiny, insignificant things. He had looked at her then, a deep sadness in his eyes. There is no such thing as an insignificant project if it improves someone's life. A well-designed clinic can reduce a patient's anxiety. A thoughtfully planned community park can bring people together. Size isn't the only measure of impact, but she couldn't hear him. She was deafened by the roar of her father's ambition. She started to see Liam through Marcus's eyes, small, idealistic, and stubbornly irrelevant. She began to subtly, and then not so subtly, undermine him. At dinner parties, when friends would ask about Liam's work, she would answer for him with a dismissive wave of her hand. Oh, Liam's still tinkering away at his little firm. He's so passionate about it. The word little was always delivered with a faint, pitying smile, turning his passion into a quaint hobby. The humiliation was a slow, steady erosion. It happened in 1,000 small cuts. There was the time Marcus, upon hearing Liam had won a small regional award for a public library design, had clapped him on the shoulder and boomed, "Well done, son. I suppose someone has to build the sheds while the rest of us are building empires." The guests around them had chuckled politely, and Liam had simply smiled his infuriatingly calm smile. Then there was the charity gala. Liam, who hated such events, had agreed to go to support a cause Chloe championed. She spent the entire evening flitting from one powerful acquaintance to another, leaving him standing alone by the bar. He watched as she laughed and leaned in close to Richard Davenport, a ruthless young hedge fund manager who was Marcus's latest protege. Davenport was everything Liam was not: flashy, arrogant, and dripping with the kind of aggressive ambition the Constantines admired. At one point, Liam saw Davenport place a hand on the small of Chloe's back, a gesture of casual ownership. Chloe hadn't pulled away. Later that night, Liam had said nothing. He simply undressed and got into bed. His silence was a canvas onto which she projected her own guilt and anger. "What?" she'd snapped, turning on the bedside lamp. "Are you going to say something, or just lie there judging me?" "There's nothing to say," he'd replied, his back to her. "You were enjoying yourself." "Yes, I was," she'd shot back. "For the first time in a long time. I was talking to people who understand my world. People who are doing things, important things. Not just drawing." The word drawing was the deepest cut. She knew how much his work meant to him, the hours of meticulous thought and effort that went into every line. To reduce it to mere drawing was to intentionally diminish his entire identity. He didn't respond. He simply lay there, breathing slowly and evenly, and his silence was more damning than any accusation. Through all of this, he continued his work. His passion projects grew in number. He would take calls at odd hours, speaking in quiet, technical terms about things she didn't understand: zoning variances, material stress tests, international building codes. He started traveling more, short trips to cities she'd barely heard of. A consultation, he would say, for a potential project. She assumed these were more of his small-time endeavors, more libraries and clinics, and felt a fresh wave of pity for his dogged, fruitless efforts. The symbolic object of his hidden life sat in plain sight in his study, a simple, leather-bound portfolio. It was always on his drafting table. Once, overcome with a mix of curiosity and contempt, she had opened it while he was out. It was filled with breathtakingly complex and beautiful designs. There was a skyscraper that twisted towards the sky like a strand of DNA, a concert hall with acoustics designed to mimic the inside of a seashell, and a master plan for an entire sustainable city in a desert. At the bottom of each page was a small, elegant logo she didn't recognize, a stylized that intertwined with a G. Below it, in small print, were the words Ethelgard Group. She had frowned, confused. It wasn't his firm's logo. She assumed it was a fantasy, a collection of dream projects he'd invented to soothe his wounded ego. She closed the portfolio, a sad, knowing smile on her face. Poor Liam, she thought, living in his dream world because he couldn't compete in the real one. She had no idea that Ethelgard Group was very, very real. It was the holding company he had founded with his inheritance from a grandfather she'd never met, a quiet, brilliant engineer who had left him a substantial but unflashy fortune. Liam had used that seed money not to buy sports cars and watches, but to invest, to build, and to create a global architectural and investment firm so discreet that its name was only known in the highest echelons of finance and development. Echelons far above the noisy, provincial world of Marcus Constantine. His small, local firm, Maxwell Architects, was a deliberate front, a quiet space where he could still do the small, meaningful work he loved while the silent, global giant of Ethelgard Group grew in the shadows. He had built an empire while they were all busy mocking him for building sheds. The final degradation, the act that sealed the fate of their marriage and set the stage for his quiet, devastating revenge, was about her father's company. Constantine Holdings, for all its bluster, was an old-world behemoth. Marcus was a brilliant raider, but a poor manager. He was slow to adapt to new technologies and global market shifts. For the past 2 years, the company had been bleeding money. Marcus, too arrogant to admit weakness, had been hiding it, shuffling funds, taking out high-interest, short-term loans to cover the losses and maintain the illusion of invincible success. He was, in essence, robbing Peter to pay Paul, hoping for a market upswing that never came. Richard Davenport, the hedge fund manager, saw the weakness. He smelled blood in the water. He began quietly buying up Constantine Holdings' debt, positioning himself for a hostile takeover that would not only seize the company, but utterly humiliate Marcus. Liam saw it too. Through Ethelgard's financial intelligence division, he had a clearer picture of Constantine Holdings' vulnerability than Marcus himself. He saw the company his wife's family had built, the source of all their pride and arrogance, teetering on the brink of collapse. And he saw an opportunity, not for revenge, not yet, but for final test. He approached Marcus, not as a titan of industry, but as a concerned son-in-law. He did it quietly at a family Sunday brunch. He'd found a moment when Marcus was alone on the terrace, staring out at his immaculate gardens. "Marcus," Liam began, his tone gentle, "I've been looking at some market analyses. It seems like the commercial real estate sector is facing a tough quarter. Is everything all right at the company?" Marcus turned, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Everything is perfect. We're having a record year." The lie was instant and reflexive. "That's good to hear," Liam said, his gaze steady. "It's just that some of the indicators suggest there's a significant amount of your corporate debt being consolidated by a single buyer. It looks like a classic takeover move." Marcus's face flushed a dangerous shade of red. For Liam, his fool of a son-in-law, to presume to understand his business was the ultimate insult. "You stick to your little drawings, son," he snarled, his voice low and vicious. "Leave the real world to the men who understand it. My company is untouchable." Liam held his gaze for a long moment. He had offered an olive branch, a quiet warning from a place of genuine, if strained, familial concern. He had given Marcus a chance to be honest, to ask for help, and Marcus had spat on it. That was the moment Liam's objective shifted. He would still save the company, but he would no longer be saving it for them. He would be acquiring it for himself. Over the next 18 months, Liam began his campaign. Using a series of shell corporations under the Ethelgard umbrella, he moved with breathtaking speed and precision. He bought the high-interest bridge loans Marcus was using to stay afloat. He became the bank. He offered generous terms, and Marcus, blinded by his own arrogance and desperation, never once looked too closely at where the money was coming from. He was so focused on the threat from Richard Davenport that he never saw the quiet, invisible hand propping him up, and in doing so, wrapping chains around his empire. To secure these massive loans, Marcus had to put up more and more collateral. First, it was a percentage of company stock, then more. Finally, in a moment of sheer panic, he pledged a controlling interest. To get the final, massive injection of cash he needed, the bank, which was in reality Liam, demanded a personal guarantor from the family. Marcus, whose personal assets were already overleveraged, put Chloe's name forward. "She's a co-owner of the marital home, a significant asset," he had told the bankers. "Her signature will suffice." Chloe, as always, had done what her father asked without question. She had sat in a lawyer's office, a place very much like the one where her divorce was just finalized, and signed a thick stack of documents she didn't read. She had scrawled her name on personal guarantees, co-signing on debts that could bankrupt nations, all while believing she was simply helping her father with some routine corporate paperwork. She had seen the name of the lending institution, a discrete entity named Ethelgard Financial, and thought nothing of it. The name meant nothing to her. Liam had watched it all. He had watched her sign away her future, her home, her entire inheritance, with a casual flick of her wrist. He had felt a pang of something. Not pity, but a profound sadness for the woman she could have been if she hadn't been so thoroughly indoctrinated into the Constantine cult of arrogance. He had built a fortress around her family to protect them from their enemy, Richard Davenport. But the price of admission was the fortress itself. And now, in the quiet, sun-drenched living room, with the scent of spilled champagne filling the air, the bill had come due. The phone call from Mr. Finch was not an attack. It was simply the collection of a debt she had willingly, if ignorantly, incurred. Chloe stared at Liam, her mind struggling to process the flood of incomprehensible information. Constantine Holdings? The house? What are you talking about? My father handles all of that. Yes, Liam said, his voice still unervingly calm. He does. And for the last 18 months, he has been handling it very, very badly. He leveraged the entire company to fight off a hostile takeover from Richard Davenport. He failed. The only thing that stopped Davenport from owning everything your family has built was another buyer who stepped in and acquired all that debt. He paused, letting the words sink in. That buyer was me, Chloe, or more specifically, my company. Her phone buzzed again. This time, the screen flashed with a name she recognized, Daddy. Her hand trembled as she answered it. She didn't even say hello. She just listened. Marcus Constantine's voice, a voice she had only ever heard booming with authority and confidence, was thin, ragged, and laced with pure, unadulterated panic. Chloe? What the hell is going on? The banks just called. They've frozen everything. Every account, every credit line. They're talking about some Ethelgard group. They say they've called in the loans. It's impossible. We're ruined. Chloe, what did you do? The accusation, the desperate, unthinking shift of blame, was the final straw that broke the dam of her composure. Me? She shrieked into the phone, tears of confusion and rage beginning to well in her eyes. I didn't do anything. You're the one who had me sign those papers. They were standard guarantees, he yelled back, his voice cracking. It shouldn't have mattered. Unless the lender, who is this Ethelgard? Chloe's eyes lifted from the phone and met Liam's across the room. He was no longer just her quiet, failed husband. He was a stranger, a figure of immense and terrifying power who had been sitting in plain sight all along. She lowered the phone, her knuckles white. Ethelgard, she whispered, the name feeling alien and heavy on her tongue. It's him. It's Liam. The silence on the other end of the line was more profound than any shout. She could picture her father in his opulent office, his face slack with disbelief, the world he had built with such brutal certainty dissolving around him like sand. Liam stood up. He walked over to the mahogany table and picked up a simple manila folder that his lawyer had left behind. He had not taken a briefcase full of documents, just this one thin folder. He opened it and laid a single sheet of paper on the table in front of her. It was a letterhead. At the top was the elegant, stylized logo she had seen in his private portfolio, the intertwined Angia. Below it, the name Ethelgard Group, and below that, a list of subsidiary companies. There was Ethelgard Financial, Ethelgard Development, Ethelgard Materials Science, and near the bottom of the list, Maxwell Architects, described as the firm's pro bono and community design division. And then, at the very top, was his name. Liam Maxwell, founder and CEO. You saw value in noise, Chloe, Liam said, his voice soft but carrying the immense weight of the truth. You and your father. You measured a man's worth by the size of his car, the price of his suit, the volume of his voice. You thought my work was small because it was quiet. You never once thought to ask what I was doing on those business trips. You never once looked at my designs and saw not just a building, but a multi-billion-dollar project. You never looked at me and saw me. He gestured to the phone, still clutched in her hand. Your father was about to lose his company to a man far more ruthless than he is. Richard Davenport would have dismantled it and sold it for parts, and he would have enjoyed every second of your family's public ruin. I stopped him. I bought the debt. I stabilized the company. I saved your legacy. He took a step closer, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of raw emotion in his eyes. Not anger, but a deep, resonant sorrow. I did it because for a long time, I still considered you my family. I gave your father a chance. I warned him. I told him he was vulnerable, and he laughed in my face. He told me to go back to my drawings. Liam's voice dropped to a near whisper, a quiet bomb that leveled the last remaining structure of her denial. So I did. I went back to my drawings. This drawing. He pulled a second sheet from the folder. It was not a blueprint. It was a corporate ownership flowchart, a complex web of lines and boxes. At the top was a single box, Ethelgard Group. Branching down from it were dozens of others. And at the very bottom, connected by a thick, solid line, was a box labeled Constantine Holdings. I didn't want to do this, Chloe, he said, his voice laced with a genuine, weary regret. I wanted a partner, not an audience. I wanted a wife who believed in me, not one who apologized for me at parties. You had 5 years to see who I was, and you never once opened your eyes. The front door burst open. Marcus Constantine stood there, his face ashen, his impeccable suit looking rumpled for the first time in his life. He wasn't followed by security or lawyers. He was alone. He stared at Liam, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air. The titan of industry had been rendered speechless. You? Marcus finally managed to choke out, pointing a trembling finger at Liam. You're Ethelgard? Liam nodded slowly. I am. But how? Your little firm, your sheds. The sheds, as you call them, were real, Liam said. I enjoy that work. It's grounding. But it was never the whole story. You only saw what you wanted to see, Marcus. A man you could feel superior to. It made you comfortable. Your comfort made you blind. Just then, another car pulled up the long, curving driveway. A sleek, black-town car. A man in a tailored gray suit stepped out. It was Arthur Vance, Marcus's oldest friend and the lead counsel for his company for over 30 years. He was a man Marcus trusted implicitly. Arthur walked into the room, his face grim, carrying a leather briefcase. He didn't look at Marcus or Chloe. He walked directly to Liam and held out his hand. Liam, Arthur said, his voice heavy with respect. I came as soon as I got the call from Mr. Finch. The transfer of control is complete. The board has been notified. They're awaiting your instructions. Marcus stared at his oldest friend, shaking hands with the man who had just stolen his empire. The betrayal was so complete, so multifaceted, that his mind simply couldn't contain it. Arthur, you knew. You're with him. Arthur Vance turned to look at Marcus, and his expression was not of betrayal, but of profound disappointment. I'm with the company, Marcus, and the company was about to be destroyed. You were drowning, and you were too proud to admit it. This man, he said, gesturing to Liam, threw you a lifeline. A very, very expensive lifeline. You should be thanking him. He just saved you from utter annihilation at the hands of Richard Davenport. Saved me. Marcus sputtered, a wild, incredulous laugh escaping his lips. He seized everything. He has secured his investment. Arthur corrected him, his voice taking on the precise, cutting tone of a lawyer. An investment you willingly and repeatedly accepted. An investment secured with collateral you willingly and repeatedly pledged. Every document is in order. Every signature is valid, including yours and yours, Chloe. He glanced at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of pity in his eyes. You are the guarantors. The debt is real. The default is real. The consequences are real. Chloe finally found her voice, a thin, pleading whisper. Liam, please. This is my family. My home. Liam looked at her, and the sadness in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet resolve. This was our home, He corrected her gently. And you were celebrating being rid of me in it. You popped champagne, Chloe. You toasted to your new beginning. Well, this is it. It's just not the one you had planned. He turned to Marcus. You will have a choice, Marcus. You can resign from the board and accept a generous severance package, and I will allow you to retire with your dignity, if not your power, intact. Or you can fight this. And if you fight, I will authorize a full forensic audit of the last 5 years of Constantine Holdings. And from what my team has already seen, I do not believe you want me to do that. It was a checkmate, delivered not with a shout but with the quiet click of a chess piece settling into its final victorious square. Marcus knew, and Liam knew that he knew, that an audit would reveal the creative accounting, the hidden losses, the desperate, borderline fraudulent measures he had taken to keep the company afloat. It would mean not just financial ruin, but public disgrace and possible criminal charges. Marcus Constantine, the corporate raider, the titan, the man who had never backed down from a fight in his life, visibly deflated. The arrogance drained out of him, leaving behind a stooped, tired old man in an expensive suit. He looked around the room, at the art on the walls, the expensive furniture, the view of the rolling hills through the floor-to-ceiling windows, all the trappings of a life he had just lost. He nodded once, a slow, defeated gesture. Liam then turned back to Chloe, who was now openly weeping, the silent tears tracing paths through her perfect makeup. The foreclosure on this house is procedural, he said, his voice softening slightly. It's an asset of the company now. You will have 1 week to gather your personal belongings. My people will arrange for movers and a storage unit at my expense. They will also help you find a suitable apartment to rent. The first 6 months will be covered. It was an act of grace, but it felt like the cruelest blow of all. He was treating her with the same detached, functional kindness one might show to a dismissed employee. He was managing her exit from his life. An apartment? She whispered, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. Yes, he said simply, your new beginning. He picked up his thin folder from the table, the only thing he was taking from the house that had been his home for 5 years. He walked towards the door, pausing beside Arthur Vance. Arthur, please have the interim board schedule a meeting for 9 a.m. Monday morning. I'll preside. Of course, Liam, the lawyer said. Liam walked out the door without a backward glance. He didn't get into a flashy sports car. He got into the same practical, dark gray sedan he had always driven, a car Chloe had often called his sensible shoes car. She watched through her tears as the car drove smoothly down the driveway and disappeared beyond the gates. The gates to her home. No, she corrected herself. The gates to his home. The weeks that followed were a surreal exercise in dismantling a life. The world Chloe had known, a world of effortless privilege and unshakable certainty, had been a mirage. As Liam's team, polite, efficient men and women in sharp suits, moved through the house cataloging assets, she began to understand the true scale of his operation. The art she had thought her father bought was actually on loan from a foundation that was part of the Ethelgard Group. The cars were leased through an Ethelgard subsidiary. The very wine in the cellar had been sourced from a vineyard in France that Liam owned. He hadn't just been living in her world. He had been quietly underwriting it all along. Her father retreated into a shell of his former self. He accepted Liam's terms, resigning from his own company and disappearing from the public eye. He and Eleanor moved into a much smaller home, the sale of which was managed by Ethelgard's real estate division. The fall from grace was absolute and mercilessly quiet. There were no dramatic headlines, no public spectacle. The Constantine Empire hadn't been shattered. It had simply been absorbed. The transition of power was so smooth that the market barely registered it. It was, as one financial analyst noted in a small column, a masterful example of a silent acquisition. Chloe moved into the apartment Liam's team had found for her. It was a nice apartment in a respectable part of the city. It was clean, modern, and utterly soulless. It was also silent. The constant hum of staff, the ringing phones, the endless stream of visitors that had been the soundtrack to her life was gone. She was alone. For the first time in her life, she had to learn to do things for herself. She learned how to use a coffee machine, how to work the dishwasher, how to buy groceries. These small, mundane tasks felt like monumental challenges. Her friends, the ones she had laughed with at galas and brunches, slowly drifted away. Her new reality was uncomfortable for them. It was a reminder that the gilded world they all inhabited was more fragile than they believed. Their calls became less frequent, their invitations non-existent. She had been a Constantine, a name that opened doors. Now she was just Chloe, a woman living in a two-bedroom apartment, a ghost haunting the edges of a life she used to command. One day, about 3 months after the divorce, she received a package. It was a simple cardboard box. Inside was a single leather-bound portfolio and a short, handwritten note on thick cream-colored cardstock. It was from Liam. She opened the portfolio. It was his private collection of designs, the one she had once looked at with such pity. This time, she saw it differently. She saw the genius, the vision, the breathtaking beauty in every line. She saw the concert hall, the sustainable city, the skyscraper. Tucked into the back was a press clipping from an international architectural journal. It was a feature on the Ethelgard Group, calling Liam Maxwell the most influential and visionary architect of a generation, a man who was quietly reshaping the world's skylines and cities. The article featured stunning photographs of buildings she had never known he'd built, buildings that were now global landmarks. The library she'd mocked had won the Pritzker Prize, the highest honor in architecture. Then she read the note. It said only 2 words. "I am sorry." The words broke her. He was apologizing to her. After everything she had done, after the years of condescension and humiliation, he was apologizing for the pain his revelation had caused. It was an act of such profound and unexpected grace that it undid her completely. It was in that moment that she finally understood the man she had lost. His strength wasn't just in his hidden wealth or power. It was in his character. The quiet dignity she had mistaken for weakness was, in fact, an unshakable core of integrity. She began to change. The process was slow and painful. It involved stripping away years of entitlement and arrogance. She got a job. It wasn't glamorous. She worked as an assistant at an art gallery, a place where she had once been a high-profile patron. It was humbling. She had to answer phones and make coffee for people she used to dismiss. But for the first time, she was earning her own money, building something of her own, however small. She started to find a quiet satisfaction in it. A year after their divorce, she saw him. She was walking home from work, carrying a bag of groceries, when his gray sedan pulled up to the curb beside her. The window rolled down. He looked the same, calm, composed, with that quiet intensity in his eyes. "Hello, Chloe," he said. "Liam," she replied, her heart pounding. "You look well," he said. It wasn't a platitude. He seemed to mean it. "I'm okay," she said. "I got your note." And the portfolio, she clutched her grocery bag. "The buildings are beautiful. I should have paid attention." He gave her a small, sad smile. "We both have things we should have done." He paused, as if debating whether to say more. "Your father's company is doing well. I promoted some of the junior executives he'd overlooked. They have good ideas. The culture is changing. It's becoming a better place to work." "That's good," she said quietly. She knew he was telling her that he hadn't destroyed her father's legacy, but was, in his own way, healing it. "I have to go," he said. "I have a plane to catch." "Another project?" she asked, a genuine curiosity in her voice for the first time. He nodded. "A pediatric hospital, in a place that's never had 1 inch." She saw it then, the through line of his life. The small, local clinics and the giant, world-changing hospitals all came from the same place, a desire to build things that help people. His scale had changed, but his purpose had not. "That's wonderful, Liam," she said, and she meant it. He looked at her for a long moment, a searching gaze. It felt like he was seeing her for the first time, too, not as a Constantine, not as his disappointing wife, but as Chloe, a woman carrying her own groceries home from a job she didn't hate. "Take care of yourself, Chloe," he said, and the window rolled up. The car pulled away, disappearing into the city traffic. She stood on the sidewalk, watching until it was gone. There was no bitterness, no anger. Only a profound, aching sense of loss for the life they could have had, and a small, fragile seed of hope for the person she was now becoming. She had celebrated the end of her marriage, believing she was stepping into a brighter future. She had been wrong about the future, but she had been right about one thing. It was a new beginning. It was the beginning of a life that was smaller, quieter, and for the first time, truly her own. True worth, in the end, is not something that can be displayed. It's not in the pop of a champagne cork or the name on a building. It's a quiet, internal architecture built of integrity, patience, and a strength that doesn't need to announce itself. It's a foundation that can withstand any storm, even one of your own making. What do you think? Is it possible for someone like Chloe to truly change? Or was this humbling just a temporary state? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining me for this story. If you found it compelling, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories of quiet strength and deserved vindication. We all face moments where we feel underestimated. The key is to know your own value, even when no one else does, and to keep building, even when no one else is watching.